Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here this morning and for holding tight in the waiting room while we got everything ready to go for you. I'm going to go ahead and dive in because we've just got a packed hour to look at state and federal wildfire bills that are in the works right now. Closed captioning is enabled. If you would like closed captioning to help you hear and understand what's going on, you can click the CC at the bottom and display those. I would also request that if you can, click on the participant icon that looks like a couple of people and go to little three dots and make sure that your name is updated with who you actually are. And if you're affiliated with an organization or an agency, it would be great to add that as well. And so you go to the participant icon that looks like people, and the three stacked dots should help you rename yourself if you need to. Also, we will be using the chat function for questions, and we'll also open it up for vocal questions, but the chat looks like a little text bubble. Feel free to open that up and use that to share and ask questions as we go. So I'm Becca Samolsky. I'm the director of Fire Adapted Colorado. We're a nonprofit organization in Colorado that connects and empowers wildfire resilience leaders to improve wildfire outcomes in Colorado communities and landscapes. And this is the second year in a row that we've hosted a legislative update webinar. One of the things that we would like to see in Colorado is having wildland fire mitigation professionals that are valued, supported, and empowered with the financial, legislative, educational, and peer-to-peer support they need to make our state the recognized leader in wildfire mitigation and resilience. And so with that legislative piece, we would just want to understand what is in the works that hopefully will help us to have a stronger foundation for wildfire resilience in the state. This also came out of conversations last year with the Department of Local Affairs Resiliency Office has a post-fire local government peer exchange group, and through discussions with that group and members of emergency management that participate in that, there was a lot of interest in providing an update session last year. And so I said, oh, I think FACO can host that. So this is kind of a continuation of that to host this discussion today. We have a lot of astute and engaged members in wildfire resilience, many of you who are here around the state, but none of us have the time to track all of the legislative activity that's ultimately hopefully going to make your jobs easier, hopefully not harder. So this morning we're going to hear from three state policy advisors and or stand-ins for them this morning with the Department of Natural Resources and Department of Public Safety, who are going to share about our current state and federal wildfire bills that are in the works. Each of them are going to give a short presentation, and then we'll have a few minutes to ask them questions. And at the end, I will also share for a few minutes about just some policy engagement ideas, invite you to participate or find others who may want to engage on certain legislative topics, and let our three experts chime in on how to engage as well. As we're going, feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat, or when we get to the question and answer time, raise your hand and I will call on people. And the little raise hand button should be under, there's a reactions button. It's a smiley face with a little plus, and there's a raise hand feature. And you also have to lower your hand by using that same button icon. If you're not seeing the icons at the bottom of your screen, or you're not seeing all of the icons for chat and closed caption and reactions, Zoom has a little three dots more button, and that's where you will find more. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to invite Daphne Gervais to start out sharing with us about some state bills that are in the works. She's the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Department of Natural Resources. And I'm going to let her share screen and take off and tell us about some of those that are she's tracking for the Department of Natural Resources.
Perfect. Thank you, Becca. Good morning, everyone. And thank you all for having me today. We're glad to have this opportunity to provide updates and remain coordinated on legislation that is currently going through the legislative process. As Becca mentioned, my name is Daphne Gervais. I am the Director of Legislative Affairs here at the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. I'm happy to be joining you all today. We are about halfway through the legislative session, so approximately 60 days left, just under. About 470 bills have been introduced so far, meaning we have approximately 200 left to go in the 55 to 60 days or so remaining. So I am here to cover some wildfire related bills that are currently going through the legislative process. I'm here with my colleague, Chief Vaughn Jones from the Division of Fire Prevention and Control, who will also be covering some of the legislation that falls on the public safety side of this topic. So I will go ahead and share my screen here and we can jump in. Just one moment as I navigate to the right slide. Perfect. All right. Can everybody see that okay? It seems like it might not be in slideshow view, but I am think that's actually going to be the best way for me to navigate the slides, if that's okay. So Becca, can you see those slides okay?
Yep, I can see them.
Okay, perfect. So let's just go ahead and get started here. The first bill that I wanted to cover.
They are pretty small like that. It's making my whole screen smaller instead of even taking the whole width of it, even though you have those ones on the side.
Oh, interesting. Let's see. I can just zoom in a little bit. Ooh, too much.
Or maybe expand, if you have multiple things open, maybe expand the screen that you're sharing.
How does that work?
If it's only doing a part of, yeah, that looks wider. Whatever you just did made it a little bit wider.
Is that, how can you see that okay?
Yeah, it's a little bit small, but I think we can.
Okay, there's really not much substance on the slides. It's just the bill titles and a few pretty pictures. So we'll use it as a general outline, but you're not missing much on the slides. So the first bill I wanted to cover is Senate Bill 5, the Forestry and Wildfire Mitigation Workforce. This is an effort to expand our forestry workforce in the state. It's being carried by Senators Jaquez Lewis and Senator Cutter. It presents a holistic approach with several different strategies to help address forestry workforce challenges. So the first part is it would direct the State Forest Service to develop materials on forestry related work opportunities to be distributed to high schools around the state. The second part would provide partial reimbursements for interns that are hired by wildfire mitigation related businesses. The third part would provide funding to create and expand forestry programs within the community college and state university system. And then finally, it would also allocate an annual $1 million to the Wildfire Mitigation Capacity Development Fund, which would go to DNR's Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Program, or COSWAP, for on-the-ground mitigation projects. And then the other funding piece within this bill is an annual $250,000 for recruiting and training wildfire prevention educators. So this one has passed through the Senate Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. It did so unanimously back in January. Right now it's waiting for a hearing in the Senate Appropriations Committee that'll determine the final funding amount for the bill. And that next step typically doesn't happen until after the long bill is introduced, which is set to happen later this month. So still a ways to go through the legislative process on this one, but it does appear to be on a good track so far. I'm going to continue running through the presentation and we'll take questions at the end, but if there's anything pressing, please feel free to pop something in the chat or raise your hand. The next bill on my list is House Bill 1018, the Timber Industry Workforce Incentives. This is a very similar effort to address timber industry workforce challenges. This one, like Senate Bill 5, came out of the Wildfire Matters Review Interim Committee, and this one is being carried by Senate Minority Leader Lynch as well as Senator Simpson. It creates a state income tax credit for tax years 2023 through 2027. That credit would be available to businesses that are involved in forestry, logging, timber, wood product manufacturing, forest health, wildfire mitigation. The tax credit is for 20% of the cost of purchasing covered equipment that is used by those businesses, up to $10,000 annually. So this does include most items used in logging and wildfire mitigation. So that includes things like trucks and trailers and equipment used in wood manufacturing, prescribed burning, and quite a bit more. The credit does require purchases to be in-state and for electric equipment when those options are available. So this one passed through the House Agriculture and Water, the Water Natural Resources Committee in the House on a 12-to-1 vote. It also passed out of the House Finance Committee unanimously. It is now in the same boat as Senate Bill 5, waiting for a hearing in the House Appropriations Committee. All right, moving on to the next slide here and a couple of additional bills. House Bill 1060 is a bill to update the State Forest Service tree nursery. So this requires the State Forest Service to make certain upgrades and improvements to the tree nursery to expand its capacity and appropriate some money for those upgrades. A bill in the 2022 legislative session passed that appropriated $5 million to the nursery for improvements and expansions. So House Bill 1060 moving through the process this year is really what's needed to finish up all of that work and cover some of the out-year costs from the original project. So this one passed out of the House Agriculture Committee unanimously, and it is waiting its turn for a hearing in the House Appropriations Committee, if you're noticing a trend there. All right, the next one on my list is Senate Bill 139, State Severance Tax Trust Fund Allocation. For a pretty boring bill title, this one is really significant. It is one of our DNR budget supplemental requests to fund the co-swap program that I mentioned earlier. So this includes $5 million ongoing on an annual basis, in addition to a one-time $5 million for $10 million total going to a co-swap for those landscape scale mitigation projects. So to finish up on the DNR side, I just wanted to mention a couple of our priorities for this legislative session. The first is the governor's budget request for a wildfire mitigation, outreach, and capacity investment package. This would be split between DNR, the State Forest Service, and the Department of Public Safety. The package includes transfers totaling $9 million. Of that $9 million, $5 million would be allocated to mitigation projects and to efforts that build local capacity, including for projects on federal, state, and private lands. And this funding would also provide resources to help local governments develop and maintain a pipeline of shovel-ready projects, which we're hoping will make us more competitive in drawing down some of the significant federal funds that are currently available. And then the remaining $4 million would be used to support public outreach efforts on fire smart building practices, mitigation efforts, home hardening incentives, insurance education, and would also provide some direct cash incentives to lower the cost of home hardening and defensible space improvements in the WUI. So I stepped into Chief Jones' territory there, and I'll let him add to that if he chooses to later in the presentation. But the exact breakout of the dollars would be $2 million to co-swap, $4 million to the Healthy Forests Vibrant Communities Fund, which includes $2 million for mitigation projects through the Good Neighbor Authority, $2 million for public outreach and education, $1 million for the Forest Restoration and Wildfire Risk Mitigation Grant Program. So that's kind of the local capacity planning and management side of things. And then $2 million to a new Wildland Urban Interface or WUI Home Hardening Fund. So I will note that JBC staff recommended approval of a one-time $2 million increase for fiscal year 23-24. That is approval of the component that goes to the Healthy Forests and Vibrant Communities Fund. Unfortunately, staff did not recommend general fund appropriations or transfers for the co-swap part, for the public outreach and education part, for Foreworm, or the home hardening fund. JBC is still considering this entire package, and in fact, a comeback is actually scheduled for this afternoon. So we'll be awaiting direction from the committee on all of this today. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention, our second big priority for this session at DNR is on stream restoration. And we are hoping to create a clear legal path for restoring the environmental health of natural stream systems across the state. Over the past decades, there have been land use practices coupled with drought and fire and climate change that have really degraded the natural function of Colorado streams. And stream restoration projects are really important tools to restore ecosystem services from healthy streams that help protect our water supplies, help insulate habitat and improve habitat. They also help both mitigate and recover from drought, fires, and floods. But under existing law, certain stream restoration activities could be subject to administration by the Division of Water Resources, meaning that they would require a water right, which creates a lot of uncertainty and potentially even an impossible path for stream restoration projects to proceed. So we as a department are seeking legislation this session that will allow stream restoration activities to occur without administration under certain parameters and guardrails that protect water users. I think we all know that watershed health and forest health and wildfire resilience are closely interconnected, and we would love to have the wildfire mitigation community's support in this effort to make sure that stream restoration can continue in Colorado, especially in the face of significant federal funding for drought resilience and water conservation that really presents a huge opportunity for the state in our watersheds. So we do have a draft of this bill available. I'm happy to share that with anyone interested. And then we are hoping to have it formally introduced in the next week or so. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like to discuss that further or have any questions. And with that, Becca, I will move on to the Department of Public Safety side of things and hand it over to my colleague, Vaughn Jones.
And thank you. We have a minute or two if anybody has any questions on yours before we jump in with Chief Jones. I don't see. There is a question if anyone's mentioned social research showing outreach and education doesn't lead to public behavior change. And he's also wondering if there's any funding for controlled burning, but I think that question about the public outreach and education is that big piece of the funding bill that you were talking about, the governor's request for a significant amount in the outreach component.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, and I think that our team has looked at a lot of research on the topic, some of which points to a pretty good level of efficacy of those efforts and some not so much. So we've tried to make sure that this request is really geared towards those evidence-based approaches. It is associated to the public outreach and education program that was really initiated from a bill last year. That's Senate Bill 2022-007. And so that is a relatively new program, but I think some initial work indicates that there could be some productive solutions within that. So we're really including that public outreach and education component as part of a holistic approach to this wildfire mitigation issue that we know that we need every tool in the toolbox to address.
Okay. And do you want to add anything? I'm not sure if this is in your arena or this might go right into Chief Jones, but anything with regards to those landscape investments that could support prescribed fire?
Yeah, so I am happy to defer to Chief Jones there. I also have my colleague, Allison Lurch on the line. I'm not sure if she might have anything to add as far as what is included within the scope of the co-swap program. I'll leave it to them.
I'm happy to add something real quick. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, as far as the Senate Bill 139 that supports sustained funding for co-swap, our co-swap program does support prescribed fire on the ground, whether it's pile burning or broadcast burning. So yes, there is an opportunity to supply more funding to projects like that across the state in the coming years.
Great, thank you, Allison. Okay, I'm gonna hold and let folks continue dropping questions in the chat that Daphne can either answer as we go or we can get back to at the end. I want to thank Vaughn Jones for joining us this morning on short notice. Joel Maleka had a family emergency and is unable to join us, but Vaughn's tracking on a lot of the same stuff for the Division of Fire Prevention and Control. He's the Wildland Fire Section Chief, as shown here for the department. And so I'll turn it over to you to share some of the DFPC related bills that are in the works.
Thanks, Rebecca. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us on. And yeah, I'll talk about 3 bills that were on this slideshow, and I think we can get to the questions. And as Daphne said, a lot of this has some overlap between our 2 agencies and the State Forest Service as well. So let's see here, Senate Bill 23161, which is the financing to purchase what it would amount to is a second Firehawk aircraft. And so just a really brief history. Obviously, after the 2020 season, we got the bill approved to buy the first Firehawk aircraft. That is scheduled to be delivered within about the next 2 months and become operational this year. And what this particular bill would do is give us the authorization to do a lease purchase on a second Firehawk aircraft. And kind of where this is coming from is Senate Bill 206 last year was a very big comprehensive bill that did a lot of different things in this arena. One of them that it did was based on the outlooks at the time last spring for the core fire season. It was not looking good at all. So we were given some one-time funding for aviation resources for last summer. And then what we were asked to do at the division was come back with a recommendation to kind of annualize that on an ongoing basis. What should our aviation fleet look like? So that's kind of where this came from. And kind of what we were looking at was that there was discussions about another large air tanker originally, but what we looked at was the cost for that resource for about a 4-month period is around $5 million. So obviously very, very expensive. You're only getting it for that 4-month period during that core fire season. And then what we did was we looked at the operating costs of a Firehawk, which is a year-round asset, can do multi-mission work, and for about the same cost. So we basically kind of put that into the recommendation for what this should look like going ahead. You know, and again, some of the differences with that are being the multi-purpose, the year-round. And the big thing we talk about at the division is why do we need our own aviation assets? It's basically that operational control that we decide that we have a base amount of resources that stay in the state of Colorado versus, you know, the federal resources that are moved around based on national priorities. And then I think the last thing I would mention, well, last 2 things maybe with the Firehawk are, you know, to us, it gets a little bit to the question of prescribed fire as well. But, you know, at the division, it's right time, right place, right resources to do that prescribed fire work. And this kind of fits into that. Again, us having that operational control. And the tricky piece with this, that's kind of why it's working its way through the legislation is that lease purchase option. Firehawk number 1 was introduced and approved when we had a lot of one-time federal funding. The state doesn't have that right now, so we're kind of looking at those creative ways to finance that. So that's 161. I'll talk about 166 here as well. A couple years ago, the governor's office wrote a letter to the Colorado Fire Commission, basically asking that group to come up with recommendations for the WUI issue as a whole. So the Fire Commission, and I'm a member of that group, we spent quite a bit of time working on some of these things, and a recommendation came out of that to establish this WUI code board. And there is a bill being ran through, I think it is in appropriations. No, actually it's in the Senate. It's going to the local government and housing committee. Senator Cutter is running that bill. Trying to work its way through the process based on those Fire Commission recommendations. I think, as everybody knows in this group, it's obviously a very sensitive, complex topic. Starts to get into local control a little bit. So there's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes, different groups trying to get this bill into a format that we can move forward. And kind of from our standpoint is, at the division is, you know, when you look again at that holistic approach, all of the things that we need to do to tackle the wildfire issue and really getting into that, you know, protecting home hardening, those kind of things. We've got to get something started down this road, and we see this, you know, this WUI code board as a way to potentially do that. And then I think I may have gone out of order, Daphne, if you could go back to Senate Bill 13. Thank you. So the last bill I was going to speak about briefly is this 13, which is the fire investigations. And that is another of the Fire Commission recommendations that came out of that group. It was in the governor's original proposed budget, was not recommended to move through in that format, but there is a set aside for this funding, and it's tied to this bill that's coming through that basically does the same thing as far as investigations. And a few keys there. Several of you may have noticed over the last year and a half, there was quite a bit of talk in the media about cause and origin of wildland fires. How many of them are unknown? In particular, I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but many of the biggest fires in wildfires in Colorado's history, the cause is unknown there. So this again came down to the Colorado Fire Commission, and a couple keys are, it needs to be for both wildland fire and structure fire and all of the other types of fire. We're trying to craft that message so we can get more data on that. What it would do would be right now, the state of Colorado has one investigator and one canine arson dog to try to cover the entire state, supporting local jurisdictions who are responsible for these. And one thing we looked at was a kind of a comparison to other states around us. And even when you look at states like Kansas and Nebraska, they had around 8 of these investigators, where we have the 1. So again, it's trying to ramp up a little bit of that state capacity to support those local county and fire department jurisdictions that don't have these kind of resources. And really it's getting to, if we don't have data on what our fire problem is, whether it's structure fire, wildfire, whatever it may be, we're going to have a hard time coming up with good, you know, science and data to drive those decisions moving forward. And I think with that, Rebecca, I think that is all I had for now. So I'll stop and we can turn it over to questions.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. That was great. And per usual, the aviation stuff gets people excited. There's a couple questions in the chat. Somebody was just wondering if if there are other aviation resources that others in Colorado had control over, or if DFPC is the only entity with firefighting aviation resources specific to Colorado.
For the majority, it's DFPC. And again, we see that as our role is kind of providing those resources that the local agencies don't have or can't afford to have. Douglas County has a helicopter program that they run. And there's a little bit on the fixed wing side not even the single engine air tanker, more along the lines of ag planes and crop dusters that a few agencies use. But for the bulk of it that I'm aware of, we have those resources.
Okay, so the other ones would be local jurisdictions or a local entity that has kind of their own that then they have further control over versus, oh, you can't take it to my part of the state. And I think that's really helpful to understand. Somebody else brought up in the chat that they thought most of those firefighting resources were federal, but I believe a lot are private as well on contract. Can you just maybe give us a little better picture? Because there's a lot of
and one thing I would mention too is the Federal Fire Commission. The work is ongoing, and we have several members from Colorado who are on that group. They have a variety of subcommittees, and one of them that the subcommittees is going on right now is those aviation resources. Basically, it's an outdated model that we're trying to upgrade and improve. And so, yeah, the majority of the resources are contracted by the federal land management agencies, either exclusive use or call when needed. But again, like I said, those get moved around based on national priorities. So Pacific Northwest is burning, that's where they go. So again, kind of, you look at it in a tiered manner, the federal agencies down to us, we see our job as having that baseline of resources we need in Colorado. And then on a very intermittent kind of hit and miss basis are those local agencies that may have a few. So did I answer the question there, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think that's great to give that picture and the approach of having our own versus leasing you did a great job of explaining that as well. Not seeing a lot of other questions. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand and come off mute or drop them in the chat. We have some discussions about wind, but those are, I think, tangential to the legislation. I don't think that's something we can do with bills. I can add to the air fleet side as well that I know the National Fire Mitigation and Management Commission, that was one of their primary tasks. That commission that came out of the bipartisan infrastructure law at the national level last year needed to come up with a national air aviation strategy, including how to build up. We've had kind of an aging fleet and losing a lot of air resources for a while. So there is a strategy in that draft. Those draft recommendations are actually the only recommendations from that commission that are out at this point. We have another question from Taylor about if there's any movement in addressing coal fires as potential causes to include in wildfire legislation or discussions among groups, just related to unknown fire starts.
I'll go ahead and take that one. No, I have not seen anything in legislation regarding that. And actually, interestingly enough, this is one where we actually overlap with DNR again, because they actually, I can't remember, it's I think Division of Mining Safety. Kind of they're responsible for the inventory of that. So basically what we're looking at is we know where those potential sources of fires are. And then it gets really tricky with, doing any work there, but, trying to work with some of those entities to start on fuels treatment type projects in those areas, but nothing pending that I'm aware of, unless Daphne knows of anything as far as legislation goes.
No, I haven't heard anything either.
Yeah, and I remember working with folks, I think with the mine division you just mentioned, that were coming in and digging a lot of those out a few years back. And so there is an active program where they try to get, find and dig those out. But yeah, we can get a new catch pretty easily in those seams. Okay, I think that's good for questions for the moment. I'm going to move us on to thinking about federal legislation for a few minutes. And Vanessa Maisel, correct me if I pronounce your name wrong, I'm sorry.
It's very, very close. Mazal, we say Mazal.
Mazal.
I really take whatever I can get.
All right, and she's DNR's policy advisor on federal affairs. So she's tracking what federal legislation is coming through that might impact us here as a state. So I'll let you share what you have.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I apologize, I'm struggling to share my screen here, and maybe wondering if there's some challenge. Oh, here we go. Okay, hang on, got it. I'm on a kind of a very old computer, so apologies. All right, here we go. Let's see, wait, just a moment. Okay. Oh, that's not what I'm looking for at all. Hang on. Stop screen sharing. Try that again. I am, apologies guys, just 1 second as I address technical difficulties here. I can kind of get started though.
Yeah, no worries. Take your time, pull it up, get comfortable. Oh, there's
I don't know what happened here. It's kind of not great. It's very ideal. Just a moment, please. What's going on? Well, what I might do instead then is I will just pull out I'll pull my notes up real quick then, and we can just share it directly. Okay. Are you guys seeing that now or no? No?
not seeing anything yet. There was a second tab when you shared earlier that looked like a slideshow on DNR legislative priorities.
Okay, hang on. Yes? We there?
Yes,
Hooray! Okay, sorry about that, folks.
and you may have to, yeah,
I
play
will.
slideshow. Perfect.
Yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and I'll put it in slideshow mode, yeah? All right, are we good? Can you see my screen here?
Yep.
Oh, super. Okay, great. Well, I'm gonna go off the cuff here because I don't quite, I think I reordered my screen, my slides at the last minute. So you guys will have to roll with me on this. I'm Vanessa Mazal, and I'm a Federal Affairs Policy Advisor in the Department of Natural Resources, work on a cross-cutting capacity. And this is really a super high level snapshot. I will just acknowledge that things are moving very, very fast also in the congressional space. So I've sort of elected to focus a little bit on some of the Colorado delegation priorities and some of the work that we're doing and starting to see with respect to the Farm Bill. And right now, just in terms of process and budget, since a lot of these things are sort of interrelated, we received the president's budget was released last week with about $24 billion in investments in community preparedness and wildfire mitigation, forest health, climate resilience, et cetera. That's a cross-cutting investments, mostly across DOI and USDA. And then also the upcoming legislation is also kind of positioning with respect to and identifying priorities that are related to the bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act investments, which in Colorado recently have included $33 million in 2022 and $37 in 2023 for front range fire mitigation related to the federal wildfire crisis strategy. And then we just saw $39 million coming through in FEMA investments for East Troublesome and Cameron Peak wildfire rehabilitation recovery. Right now, DNR is quite focused, and the governor's office is quite focused on finalizing our congressionally directed spending asks, which is a fancy term for earmarks for those of you who don't follow the budget process super closely. The congressional delegation has requested those really by kind of last week and this week at the latest. So we're kind of finalizing those in partnership with our delegation and also with our divisions. That will be ideally, I think right now we are considering working on an earmark request that would complement the state's hopeful investment in the Colorado State Forest Services nursery project, and hopefully help to bring that to even more scale in the future, which would be very exciting. And then also just wanted to mention the America the Beautiful Challenge, which some of you guys may have been familiar with from last year, is a cross-cutting interagency investment that came out of infrastructure funding for a variety of programs. There are landscape level, there's four different programs within that, and one of them is kind of a large scale $5 million-ish multi-jurisdictional landscape level investment opportunity. There are capacity planning opportunities. There's a Forest Service and forestry funded or specific program that's this year more general than it was last year. Last year it had pretty specific parameters, among others. So I encourage folks to take a look at that. This year is a little bit different. They're requiring pre-proposal approval before invited applicants can move on to the final proposal stage, which will be due in July 2020. So that's housed at NIFWIF. 2023 Farm Bill is really kind of the name of the game this year. As folks know, it's renegotiated every 5 years. In 2018, the 10-year price tag was $860 billion, and this year that has gone up based on Congressional Budget Office estimates to $709 billion over 5 years, and then $1.3 trillion over 10 years. That's the first time that it's inched up. The projections have inched up over $1 trillion. It's quite a significant investment. A lot of that does reflect some of the doubling up of investments that had, or kind of one-off investments that came out of that are tapering off from the infrastructure and IRA funding. I think IRA in particular. The bill, there's no fixed format for the bill, but it typically includes 12 titles. Most of the significant majority of investment goes to mandatory spending on commodities, crop insurance, conservation, and nutrition. And then there are discretionary, it establishes discretionary spending authorities for rural development, research, horticulture, credit, trade, energy, and forestry, and then the catch-all category. And there are the majority of the forest health related and wildfire mitigation related investments are in the forestry title, which is Title 8, but there are also some forest related and forest mitigation related and conservation related programs in some of the other titles as well. And I just wanted to show you this. This was a new figure that came out from the, I believe it was officially by the CBO in the CBO report. But essentially just to give you a sense that there's, really the amount of investment that comes through on, let's see, on, there we go. Discretionary spending is really quite slim. It's a minor amount. It's less than 1% of the overall spending. This year, the nutrition spending, the SNAP program primarily is has grown based on the, as I mentioned, kind of some of those investments that are tapering off from the pandemic related spending bills. So that has gone up to 86% this year, which is a really striking amount. But crop insurance also makes up 7%, commodities and conservation both at 4%. And then those IRA specific related investments are at 2%. That's mostly NRCS funding. And then discretionary programs really kind of duke it out for the remaining roughly 1% of the Farm Bill funding. In the Title 8 forestry bill, just to let you know that essentially what it does is it essentially sets the parameters and establishes or modifies or eliminates spending authorities or authorizations rather. And so the last bill in 2018 included these authorizations: the reauthorized Insect and Disease Treatment Authority, expanded Good Neighbor Authority, new Tribal Forestry Demonstration Project Authority. It for the second time re-upped the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program Authority and the Wood Innovation Grant Programs, and then finally the Landscape Scale Restoration Program. This year, we're not quite sure what is going to be emerging there, but a lot of those, a lot of the priorities that are starting to emerge, if we can get a sense right now from kind of the introduce-o-rama that is taking place in Congress, is right now, folks, congressional delegation members are just, dropping bills that will ultimately be considered in the bill or for ultimate hopeful consideration in the bill. And these are some of the priorities that we're really starting to see across the board. There's a real press around landscape level, multi-jurisdictional, collaborative funding, forest health and watershed initiatives. And I've heard that from, really across the board that this is definitely the name of the game. So for those folks who are interested, just, start ramping up your partnership muscles. Wildfire workforce training and pay is also another big area investment. We're certainly seeing quite a lot in community disaster preparedness and recovery. You were just speaking about aerial equipment, quite a lot of equipment upgrades. I think that's really exciting, certainly something that our delegation here in Colorado has been focused on, and wildfire detection equipment as well. And then natural infrastructure, nature-based solutions, and priority watershed protection. And I will just mention actually that one, on the last point, the priority watershed protection, something I didn't mention with respect to the BIL and IRA funding, is that our delegation is pressing hard for some of those dollars that have been directed toward the crisis strategy to be shifted, or not shifted, but in the future to be directed towards some of the western slope priority watersheds, including the Gunnison and Colorado River basins, or headwaters rather. So those are things that also the state is supporting, and I think that we may be also supporting an ask for in our CDS requests. So that's just something to keep your eyes out for. And similarly, across the board, kind of these collaborative initiatives. So these are some of the key pieces of legislation that our delegation has introduced and is tracking or is working very closely on. We have quite I dropped in at the bottom, there may or may not this year, we may or may not see an actual public lands bill come to fruition, but there are a few priorities that our delegation has that they're pressing hard on. One of them is the Dolores River National Conservation Act, and not National Conservation Area Act rather, and then the Core Act, which has been introduced a few times and has kind of been, is being updated, I think, for introduction in the next couple weeks. And that one, for folks who may be familiar, focuses on some areas around Camp Hale and around kind of the Central Mountains, and establishes some innovative energy innovation programs, and also some mineral withdrawals rather, kind of in the Thompson Divide area. So it's a pretty exciting act. We've been very excited about that and have been supportive of that, and certainly hope that the delegation can make movement on that this year, whether or not it's as a standalone or as part of a lands package. And I think with that, that's my last slide. So I'm happy to answer questions. I probably don't have the answers to questions, but I'm happy to entertain answers or questions. And then I will certainly be happy to do research if there's stuff that I can answer or that I can't answer today.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That's, yeah, a lot moving. That's why we had to bring you in, because none of us can possibly begin to think about doing that as an additional.
Let me make sorry to interrupt, Rebecca, one other comment, just to let folks know. I think DNR is more than happy. We are really kind of trying more and more to coordinate with the governor's office and the delegation staffers and or delegation members. And I just wanted to mention that there are some new committee assignments. And actually, I wanted to mention also that the House has a new forestry specific subcommittee. So that's interesting. And I can't remember, or rather under the agricultural committee. So I'm not, there are some interesting assignments. Lauren Boebert, Representative Boebert, has several natural resources or natural resources related assignments, and Senator Hickenlooper sits on the Senate ENR committee, the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and then Senator Bennett is very influential in his role as the chair for the subcommittee on the Senate Agricultural Committee for forestry, public lands, and I'm going to botch the rest of it.
Yeah, great. So that's why we've got some leaders in the state representing our state and federal government around these natural resource issues.
Definitely. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt, Rebecca. Go ahead.
No problem. One of the questions that we have in the chat, and this is maybe for everybody at this point as well, we didn't talk about grasslands much. There's always a lot on forestry. Grasslands maintenance is more challenging. So just wondering if that's come up with any of the legislation or the maintenance aspect of grassland wildfire prone habitats. If that's something you've heard addressed or see any bills that would support maintenance in the grasslands, mitigation in the grasslands.
Yes, well, so not as much in the bills yet, but it certainly is it's a big priority both for the NRCS programs and folks, and that's certainly going to be a big focus for the Farm Bill. So we are expecting there to be some renegotiated rent levels for the Conservation Reserve Program and EQIP programs. It's certainly a significant focus across the board for the America the Beautiful Challenge. I'll say that those larger scale landscape level investments, because there's so much coming to forestry through other initiatives and programs, grasslands and sagebrush are really the two priority types of landscapes for the America the Beautiful Challenge, and a lot of the DOI related investments that came through the infrastructure law. And so, yeah, so I would say that so far, and I would have to check into that. I haven't seen much come through specifically from being dropped yet. That's kind of under consideration that we've been tracking closely, but we have been tracking, honestly, the forestry title, you know, kind of with with a little bit of a keener eye. So I'm happy to also do some research on that.
Okay.
I will say that it's a huge priority for the state, and we expect to resubmit our America the Beautiful application this year that is focused on private lands, voluntary conservation initiatives for grasslands within lesser prairie chicken habitat. And for those folks who don't track the ESA, the Endangered Species Act closely, lesser prairie chicken was listed in January officially. I think actually the listing goes into effect this month. That affects a significant portion of our mostly private and state lands down in the southeast part of the state.
Great, thank you. Another question for you regarding the CORE Act. I know one of the challenges last time it was proposed from Mark Novak is there was some wilderness area proposed in the wildland urban interface, some stuff that was coming right down close to towns and along highways. Do you know if those boundaries are the same, if there's still wilderness designations that potentially come all the way down to highways in the back of condos?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't checked. I haven't really been tracking the boundary modifications that closely this year. So I'm not sure, but I'm happy to look into that. And I can leave my information on the screen, or if Rebecca, I can drop it into the chat, and happy to follow up on that question. That's a good one for sure.
Okay. Yeah, that would be a great one for sure. Yeah, and somebody else asking for follow-up. Deborah Cave is also asking for follow-up on the grasslands issue as far as fire mitigation in the Wowie grasslands area. So not just grassland habitat side of things, but grassland
mitigation in particular.
Mitigation.
For sure. Yeah, that absolutely. I think that's a really good question, and I would be more than happy to follow up with it. As I mentioned, like I know that's certainly been the front range investments haven't been exclusively limited to the forest, to the national forest. I know that there have been also some on the Comanche, or rather, yeah, let me think about that. Yeah, no, maybe I'm wrong. Actually, I think they are limited to the ARNF and Pike San Isabel National Forest. But regardless, it's certainly something that we're very interested in as well, and I'm happy to do some more research on.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. And we've just got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask if anybody has any pressing questions. Please do put them in the chat, and we will make sure that Vanessa and Daphne and Vaughn and Joel, who wasn't able to be here, are able to get a hold of those and respond if we miss something here. And it would be great if y'all are willing to put your contact information in the chat as well for folks. And I will also try and get a hold of your slides if you're willing to share them and share them out with notes from this, because I'm sure folks were frantically trying to keep up with note taking for all the wonderful information you all were sharing. So just to kind of wrap up, I did want to throw out there an opportunity to think about how you can engage with this information. It's challenging and we can't keep up with it all. So I just wanted to share a few things that Fire Adapted Colorado is doing. I do have a folder of some resources about engaging in legislative advocacy and administrative advocacy around topics that are important to you. I'm going to drop that folder in the chat with a few resources that I think are really, really helpful. There's one in there from the nonprofit, let's see, the Center for Lobbying in the Public Interest on strategies and legislative advocacy. And it's like a great, simple, but comprehensive picture of everything you might need to know if you want to step into that arena. I'll go ahead and drop the link to that one directly in the chat as well. And then the final thing here that I think gets to maybe Gloria's question in the chat is we do have a legislative tracker that I think at least these state bills are on it. I haven't attempted to put any of the federal ones, but all of the state ones that were mentioned today, you can access from legislative tracker that I'm going to have to take a minute to get in the chat here. And this is very challenging to keep up with, but I did get a couple of tips earlier. Daphne was telling me how to kind of track and see the new bills that are coming up. But I encourage you guys, if there's something that interests you in this legislative tracker that you're like, oh, this is a really important issue to me, please reach out. There's probably other people that are on today that are also super passionate about certain things. And in order for democracy to work, we really need to have the subject matter experts that know how these things are going to work or how they're not going to work, giving feedback and making these better laws. So please feel free to take a look at that. I will try to keep it updated on at least like a bi-weekly basis. It's kind of challenging to get in there all the time when it's not my all the time job. And I'd just like to throw it to Vanessa and Daphne and Vaughn. Do you guys have any additional suggestions for support that you might need from outside of your agency, or how to track and engage on some of these legislative issues as subject matter experts?
Vanessa, did you want to start on the federal side?
Sure, Daphne. You know, I would say that there's not a great formula. You know, we work really closely with partners across the board. We do have, I would just invite folks, for starters, to connect through either through the Colorado State Forest Service, which is, you know, we work very, very closely with on shaping a lot of our priorities and informing our federal legislation, as well as the Department of Agriculture. Both of those are close partners for us in shaping kind of our DNR agenda for the federal priorities. So I'm happy to caught off guard a little bit, but mostly would just say that we engage informally on a range of, you know, through a range of fora. And I think that direct connection is really kind of the first starting place. We have really great subject matter experts in our assistant directors at the within the executive director's office, who are also happy to make connections for you. So feel free to reach out to Daphne or myself, and happy to make those connections if needed. And I will say that we tend to put out APBs, you know, calls for sort of engagement on some of our priority issues through some of our more informal channels too. So we're trying to kind of, you know, develop two-way communications with all of our external partners.
And that might be a place where we can better tie in with you as well directly to get a lot of information out to a lot of people who are wildfire mitigation field related.
That would be great, Rebecca. Yeah, we should definitely formalize some systems there.
And then on the state side of things, I would say the earlier you're able to engage on a piece of legislation, the better, even if that's before introduction and you're hearing about a bill and you happen to know, you know, who the proponents are, who the sponsors are, just reach out to them, try to get a draft early on and provide feedback even pre-introduction. And then, you know, as far as tracking things during the legislative session, both the House and the Senate post a schedule on a daily basis that will show you all of the bills that are scheduled for a hearing or for floor work over the next couple of weeks ahead. So we use that as a tool to kind of coordinate our engagement for particular hearings. And I think that's a good way to keep track of kind of what's moving and what you might want to testify on, what you might want to reach out to sponsors on. So that schedule kind of gives you a good idea of how to prioritize bills that are moving through the process.
Great. Vaughn, you want to add anything?
They covered it pretty well. Just a couple things. I think, you know, obviously, if you're like Daphne just finished with there, if you're reaching out to a sponsor or whatever, I think coming as a group that represents, you know, a larger audience, a group of stakeholders, but also make sure you are speaking on behalf of that group and your interests represent those. I think those carry a little bit more weight. And then to the part Daphne said about getting involved earlier, I think in Colorado, the last couple of years, when you look at the Colorado Fire Commission and the Forestry Health Advisory Council, those two groups, their recommendations have really done well in the legislative process. So it's making sure you know who your representatives are on those groups when some of those recommendations are being formed early on. And that's about all I have to add.
Right. Well, thank you all so much for your time today. And we're just after 11. I'm sure other people are hopping to other meetings they already have to get on. I am going to drop the Colorado Wildland Fire Conference is coming up a month from today. A bunch of us will be in Fort Collins. So check out the link if you haven't participated yet. And thank you all to our speakers for your support and sharing what you know today. There is a couple question feedback survey that'll pop up at the end of this. If you'd please be so kind as to take that, we really appreciate any feedback that you have. And we will get notes out on this to all the same channels that we invited people through. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.